The remainder of this should be the makeup screencast for week 4 content, everything after hypocalcemia to acid-base balances, because something has happened to my video. The unfortunate thing is I do not have a classroom in front of me, it's just me, so let me know if you have any questions and I'll try to answer them either in the comments or within the structure of our classroom or discussion boards. So hypercalcemia, of course, the issue with hypercalcemia is too much calcium is located outside of the cell and is pushing sodium away from the plasma membrane of the cell. Therefore, especially sodium will be affected by the overabundance of calcium. Sodium will diffuse away. Therefore, the neuron cannot depolarize. Therefore, we're going to have decreased neuromuscular excitability. Now, a common cause of hypercalcemia could potentially be hyperparathyroidism. You have too much parathyroid hormone. That means that you're going to be stimulating osteoclasts to release calcium into the blood. That means you'll have elevated blood calcium. It's rare to have a hypercalcemic crisis as a result of hyperparathyroidism. This is something we're going to cover during our endocrinology week, but we won't really see it until then. And it would be a low-grade issue associated with hyperparathyroidism. You, of course, need vitamin D in order to properly absorb calcium. Therefore, if you overdose vitamin D, most likely via supplementation, that could also cause too much absorption of calcium, leading to hypercalcemia. And, of course, if there's an issue with your kidneys, you would have decreased calcium excretion. There we go. With magnesium, what you have is magnesium is going to act like a plug in something called the NMDA receptor. The NMDA receptor is located on dendrites, and the NMDA receptor is responsible for allowing in sodium to depolarize and cause excitatory postsynaptic potentials. So this is a concept associated with the action potential, and if you do not understand what an excitatory postsynaptic potential, or EPSP, is, I do recommend reviewing that content from AMP1. But if you don't want to go back and review that action potential information, the most important piece of information here is that magnesium is acting like a bodyguard. It's acting like a plug that limits the amount that the cell can depolarize. Therefore, if you have a lot of magnesium, you have a lot of ways to limit action potentials, and if you do not have magnesium, you do not have a way to limit action potentials. Therefore, hypomagnesemia is going to be a condition of low magnesium, either from low intake or malnutrition, for example. And that's going to lead to depolarization. That's going to increase neuromuscular excitability. You have no bodyguards, you have no gatekeepers, you have increased neuromuscular excitability. That does lead to the release of acetylcholine to neurons. That's what action potentials do. They cause neurotransmitter release. And that's why these slides are talking about acetylcholine. So you have depolarization, you release acetylcholine. If you have increased depolarization, you will have excessive release of acetylcholine. So again, you can have decreased magnesium intake or absorption. Chronic alcoholism can do this for a number of reasons. You can injure the lining of your gut, for example. Ileal resection, that means you've resected the ileum, part of your small intestine. That just decreases surface area for absorption. So if you have had a resected bowel, we'll find during digestive week you'll have a number of nutritional deficiencies, and one of those possibilities can be low magnesium. Of course, hypermagnesemia means that we have too much magnesium. That means you have too many gatekeepers, and that means that neuromuscular excitability will be depressed. A very likely case of hypermagnesemia could come from certain laxatives or antacids that contain magnesium, milk of magnesia being a very, very common one. Yeah, that's going to be the most likely cause of hypermagnesemia, and again, that is depressed neuromuscular function. The phosphates are very, very straightforward. phosphate is something that is used in adenosine triphosphate. So if you have hypophosphatemia, you are going to be lacking a necessary substrate for ATP synthesis. And all of the outcomes associated with hypophosphatemia are the same outcomes you would expect for a lack of ATP in the cells. And it's not just neurons or muscles in this case, although you will see a lot of clinical manifestations related to a lack of ATP for neurons and muscle cells. So again, hypophosphatemia, not enough ATP. Hyperphosphatemia is going to increase neuromuscular excitability. Now our note here is that we're causing hypocalcemia signs and symptoms, and there's actually correlates for every single one of these. For every single one of these, there are nursing study guides that show you which other electrolyte imbalance is this most similar to. So this is not a vacuum. You can go out and find those resources. Somebody sent me a copy of it at some point. I'll try to track it down, but you can cut your studying in half if you can remember which electrolyte imbalance is most similar to another electrolyte imbalance. Now, of course, if somebody has too much phosphate, they have too much energy in the cell, and certain enemas or laxatives may contain phosphate, and that would be one way to get hyperphosphatemia. The last of our content today is related to acid-base homeostasis and imbalance, which does mean that we need to understand what pH is. Our pH is on a scale from 0 to 14. 7 is neutral and is best represented by H2O, which is water. If things are more acidic, they will contain more hydrogen ions. And if things are more alkaline, which is also known as basic, they are over 7, and they will actually contain proportionally more hydroxyl ions. If you have pure hydrogen and hydroxyl in equal concentrations, then you will have pure water, bringing you back to neutral. For humans, we have a very, very narrow range of pH in which we can exist. Now, we will have different bodily fluids at different pHs, but for our most significant for the time being is the pH range for blood, which should be between a pH of 7.35 to 7.45, which does make blood very, very, very slightly basic or alkaline. Death can occur if pH falls below 6.9 or above 7.8, again indicating that we're in a very, very narrow range. So we're actually going to have two completely different systems contributing to the maintenance of our homeostatic pH range, contributing to keeping us at about 7.4. We have two systems working on this. They are our respiratory system and our renal system, our excretory system. In our respiratory system, we have the ability to ventilate. We have the ability to off-gas CO2. In the urinary system or renal system, we have the capacity to urinate out any acid. Any metabolic acid will be urinated. Excreted is another way to say that. And our other system that's part of the renal system is that tubule cells, especially cells of, let's say, proximal convoluted tubule, can synthesize something called the bicarbonate ions. So both of these are going to work together to maintain a very narrow range of pH. Our bicarbonate buffer system, again, is part of our kidneys. It's part of our renal or urinary system. This is a bicarbonate ion, and the most important thing about a bicarbonate ion is that it is capable of binding to free hydrogen ions or releasing free hydrogen ions depending on the serum concentration of hydrogen. So if you're in a very basic environment, bicarbonate can release hydrogen and make it more acidic. If you're in a very acidic environment, bicarbonate can bind that free hydrogen and make it slightly more alkaline. What it's actually doing is converting between a weak acid and bicarbonate. So this weak acid is a lot less dangerous than free hydrogen ions. So this is just the transformed form of bicarbonate after it is bound to a hydrogen ion. Therefore, our bicarbonate buffer system, this circulates throughout the cardiovascular system, helps keep you in that narrow pH range. It is also vulnerable if somebody has some kind of renal disorder. If you have kidney disease of any kind, this buffer system would be impacted by that. The respiratory contribution to acid-base balance is excreting CO2. When we inhale and exhale, that is actually called ventilation, whereas respiration is actually gas exchange. Our respiratory contribution to acid-base balance is specific to getting rid of CO2. When we exhale, we off-gas CO2, and when we off-gas CO2, we actually decrease the level of CO2 in the blood. And one thing that we find is that CO2 plus H2O equals carbonic acid. Therefore, if there is a lot of CO2 in the blood, there is a lot of carbonic acid in the blood, meaning that somebody might develop respiratory acidosis. Now, one reason you may have elevated CO2 in the blood is if you are hypoventilating, failing to off-gas CO2. Now, if you are hyperventilating, you may be off-gassing too much CO2, decreasing the amount of carbonic acid in the blood, and making you more alkaline, perhaps putting you into respiratory alkalosis. We're also going to find that the respiratory system and the excretory or renal system are both going to compensate for each other. So, for example, if somebody has metabolic alkalosis, something's wrong with the kidneys, and the blood has become too alkaline, we may actually develop compensatory hypoventilation. Somebody may start having a lower respiratory rate and depth because of a metabolic acidosis or alkalosis. So they are in compensation patterns with each other. Always keep in mind cause and effect. We can start from any point in the cycle. We can start from this person has low CO2. We can start from they have a respiratory disorder. We can start from they have a renal disorder. We can start from the blood. We can start from respiration. And follow the outcome of that. That's what our aim is here. Now again, the acid that you are excreting through your lungs is carbonic acid. The acid that you are excreting from your kidneys is literally any other acid. Any acid produced by the body or any metabolic pathway can be excreted or will be excreted exclusively by the kidneys. So any metabolic pathway. The reason there's so much ammonia in urine is that ammonia is a mild acid. So a very major acid that we are excreting through our urine is ammonia. Just as an example, you can't get rid of ammonia from your lungs, you can only get rid of carbonic acid from your lungs. So your kidneys contribution then is to urinate free hydrogen ions or any metabolic acid. And a metabolic acid is every acid except for carbonic acid. So you could have metabolic acidosis, you could have respiratory acidosis, you could have metabolic alkalosis, you could have respiratory alkalosis, and you could also have mixed acid-base imbalances. A lot of these imbalances are going to come from things like vomiting or diarrhea. Is going to be a common underscoring of basically all of these. It's always going to be about increasing acids, increasing bases, or removing acids or removing bases, or the inability to do any one of those. For metabolic acidosis, our clinical manifestations are headache, abdominal pain, CNS depression. And of course we do have some more visuals over here, but this is what I will hold you to. With respiratory acidosis, we are likely to experience headache, tachycardia or other cardiac dysrhythmias, blurred vision, tremors, vertigo, disorientation, lethargy, or somnolence. With metabolic alkalosis, we are likely to experience postural hypotension, increased neuromuscular excitability, and even belligerence, Now, keep in mind, a lot of the people coming in with these are perhaps drug addicts. Maybe they're experiencing an overdose. So, in addition to all of the other manifestations of an overdose, this person may also be belligerent, and that belligerence may not directly be the drugs, that belligerence may be metabolic alkalosis. And then respiratory alkalosis, again, this is the one that you can do for yourself by hyperventilating on purpose. Increased neuromuscular excitability, paresthesia, which is numbness or tingling of fingers and around the mouth. That's actually pretty easy to experience with voluntary hyperventilation, and confusion. So again, I don't recommend that you do this just for funsies, but technically you can if you are in a safe place and under observation from friends who can help you if something bad happens. It is possible for these things to happen simultaneously. It's more likely that they'll happen in the same direction, so somebody with bacterial pneumonia may develop respiratory acidosis and also develop severe diarrhea because of their illness and concurrent metabolic acidosis as well. It is also possible to have them mix acid versus base, but it would be a lot less likely. And that is it. That is all I'm doing for the screencast. Let me know if you have any questions.